Back in 2006, we got a new scoreboard at Leesville Road High School. I always had a sneaking suspicion that we got it because our principal, Stephen Gainey, thought we might be on the verge of blowing up the old one with the number of points we'd be scoring during the home games over the next few years. The scoreboard was from Daktronics, and the salesman was there for the installation of the new scoreboard. And we got to talking about scoreboards in general. At that point, I had over 30 years experience, so the conversation got into some of the good and bad scoreboards I had seen. Naturally, I had a great scoreboard story that I told him. Back in 1979, 5 or 6 years before I arrived at McBee High School in South Carolina, the Panthers had qualified for the state playoffs, and they had won the right to host a first-round game. That had never happened in the history of the school. Now, the state rules required that they must have an electric scoreboard in order to host, and they did not have one. And they had only a week in which to get one, have it installed, and up and running. The town fathers and school officials tried to figure out where they could get a scoreboard in a week's time, get it to McBee, and get it installed. It seemed like a pretty hopeless task, something that really couldn't be done. That is, if you discount the power of good old boy politics. They located a scoreboard they could purchase. The scoreboard, however, was in Minnesota, and there's no way in hell to get that scoreboard from Minnesota to McBee, South Carolina. Not in a week's time. Mind you, there wasn't even such a thing as overnighting a package in those days, much less overnighting a football scoreboard. But that's where the good old boy South Carolina politics came into play. The mayor of McBee, Peyton Fields, had a son who was a state senator. Jimmy Fields, the state senator, got on the phone to the one person he knew who had the power to get things done and done quickly, United States Senator Strom Thurmond. Now, Senator Thurmond stayed in office until he was almost 100. He did so because of constituent services more than anything else. He took care of the people back home. And he had been in office so long, he knew how to make things happen. So Jimmy Fields called Senator Thurmond, explained the situation to him, and asked if he could help. The senator said he would see what he could do. Shortly afterwards, the senator called back and asked if the folks in McBee could get a large enough truck to haul the scoreboard from Columbia, about 50 miles away, to McBee if he could get it to Columbia. They told him they were sure they could get their hands on one. The senator told them to have the truck at McEntire Air National Guard Base outside of Columbia on Thursday. A local farmer, Kenneth Owl, had a son on the team, and he had a flatbed truck used for hauling cotton. And he drove it over to Columbia and met a large Air Force plane at the air base on Thursday. They worked through the night on Thursday and all day on Friday, putting the post in cement, mounting the scoreboard, and a local named Will Porter wired the thing up and had it ready to roll by game time on Friday night. They cut it close, but they got it done. Yes, boys and girls, a United States Senator actually used his influence and his position as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee to requisition a United States Air Force plane to fly a high school football scoreboard from Minnesota to South Carolina at taxpayer expense. Now, Mr. Owl also made another huge contribution to that field when he built portable goalposts that could be taken down and removed from the combination football-baseball field once football season was over each year. Without that, many a right fielder would have found himself concussed after running into the one along the right field line. Swear to God, it's all true. Years later, when I got to McBee, I was able personally to see that good old boy network in play. But we'll get to that later. Anyhow, I told the story of the scoreboard to the salesman, and he laughed and thought it was a great story. At the time, I didn't know that he thought that it was complete bullshit. Fast forward a few years, and I ran into him at a coaches convention where he was selling scoreboards. He couldn't wait to tell me his story. You know that story you told me about the McBee scoreboard? I thought it was pure bullshit. I didn't believe a word of it. But look at this. And he pulled out a picture of the junkyard where they kept their old scoreboards for used parts. And there it was, McBee Panthers inscribed on it, sitting up against a fence. I saw this, he said, and started to tell one of the guys there the story, and he stopped me. And he told me it was all true. He had been around at the time. Not long after I became athletic director, I saw those political connections joined with the women's basketball coach's determination to pull off another miracle that I sure never thought could happen. This story also involves the playoffs, but this time it's girls basketball, and it was a state championship game. It just so happened that the game was going to be played on the same Saturday as the SAT. This spring SAT was the last one before the summer, and there were several girls on the team who absolutely had to have that SAT on that weekend in order to go to college. When they won the semifinal game earlier in the week, there seemed no way to get around that SAT. The College Board doesn't care about championships. They have their dates, and you take your test. And you take it on the date that you signed up for. Now, there was an exception to those who practiced the Sabbath on Saturday, but you had to have indicated that when you signed up and proved it long before the week of the test. Laurie Roberts, who these days is Laurie Calder Green, my wife, told me she was going to get those girls another date to take the test. I laughed at her. I told her it wasn't going to happen. The College Board didn't make exceptions. She called them. Of course they said no. She called the county superintendent of schools. He couldn't help. She called the state superintendent of schools. He couldn't help. She called Senator Thurmond's office. He couldn't help. She called and she called and she called. She insisted, even after all these no's, that she was going to get them a new test date. I just shook my head. As it happened, the Secretary of Education for the United States was one Dick Riley, former governor of South Carolina. You see where this is headed now, don't you? Yep, she knew him. Her father, who was a county commissioner, knew him. They had been in charge of election efforts for him in Chesterfield County when he ran for governor. And when they called, Dick Riley himself answered the phone. Dick Riley himself reached out to the College Board. He explained to the College Board What a great idea it would be if they were to grant these girls a different testing date. They got a new test date, and all the girls were able to play in the state championship, which they won. Now, I never doubted her again, no matter how crazy or far-fetched the idea was that she came up with. She knew how to get things done. She still does.